Hello and welcome back to the Unfiltered Autistic Podcast. And this week I am joined by Pete Wharmby, an autistic ADHD adult who is an author, writer, speaker, and might I add, a former teacher. Pete and myself will chat a little bit about two of his incredible books, an upcoming book, and I suppose my most favourite of the two that he has, authored is Untypical. It's a well-read book in this house, so we will definitely be talking about it on today's podcast, but also in particular through the lens of former teacher, but also, I suppose, as a former pupil in school, his perspectives, I suppose, on how to support neurodivergent children and teens across the school setting and how families can support as well. So let's get going. So Pete, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And for everyone listening, that we're going to be focusing all around, I suppose, autistic students and school attendance. And I actually, myself personally, I'm not a mega fan of the language of school avoidance or, non-attendance, because I feel like it places the pressure or the focus on the student as opposed to what's happening in the environment that kind of takes the student into a realm of feeling unsafe that they can't attend. Now, I'm also, if you're listening to the podcast or watching the video format, mega fan of Pete. If you watch anything that I do on social, I'm a mega fan of incredible authors and autistic advocates, and Pete happens to be both. This is just one of his incredible books. We'll chat about that a little bit later. But I suppose I'll get down to the questions because I know everyone listening is so delighted and no more than myself, just inspired to hear what you have to say. So I put out some questions on my social media recently about what might you like to speak to Pete about, and I'm really focused on school because you're actually a former teacher as well, Pete, aren't you? So we're going
I
to
am,
focus a
yes,
little bit
yeah.
because he's that dual perspective. So I suppose one of the questions that came in, and again, I'll read it broadly, but again, you speak to how you feel about it. Many autistic students are labelled as emotionally avoidant or resistant to school attendance, when the focus should be on the fact that they are in deep distress. How can we shift the narrative from blaming the child to examining the conditions within the school that may be causing the harm? So taking the focus off the child and back onto what's happening in the environment that makes them feel unsafe to attend.
It's a good question. And honestly, my initial response to it when I read it earlier today or yesterday or whenever it was to just kind of go, I, I don't know. like how much more have we got to say this? And
I
nobody
know.
listen. It really does get to the point where you just think, is it willful? Like, are they actually now willfully ignoring this key piece of information? The reason I say that is because it's hardly rocket science, is it?
No.
To suggest that in any situation when something is happening that we might not want to happen, I think it's fairly natural to explore different reasons. Well, why is this happening? Let's have a think about that. And that just doesn't seem to happen when it comes to school refusal at all. It's like
It's
the
always like,
kid,
why can't they attend as opposed to what's
yeah,
happening?
the kid refuses to go, which in my personal view, and I've gone on record saying this many times, is a perfectly rational thing to do given the circumstances. And and all that happens is the school says, right, you're bad, you're naughty, you are misbehaving. We are going to punish you and your parents to the greatest extent that we possibly can. I mean, that's shorthand, but that does tend to be the avenue
There's a lot
that,
of
that
shame and
occurs.
judgment
There
and
is,
kind of
yeah.
misinterpretation,
And
isn't there?
no point does anyone seem to say, I wonder why. I wonder what the issue is here. And I think what underpins this, and I mean, you've caught me at the right time because I am writing about this at the moment.
Amazing.
This is the topic of my new book,
Amazing.
and at the moment I'm writing the introduction is proving to be very difficult to do because I know that I'm going to be coming up against people who are biased against this stuff, who don't want to hear it. So I'm having to really tread gently, to really try and kind of capture hearts and minds. And one thing that I've come up with, or one thing that I've certainly want to explore in this, is that I think people view children attending school as such a basic requirement that they struggle to imagine any kind of alternative. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like it's like people view children going to school in the same way that you might view, I don't know, human beings going to the toilet or human beings needing to eat. So what happens is people just have this knee-jerk opinion of, well, kids just have to go to school, don't they? That's just what they have to do. There's no
It's a
wriggle room
natural
there.
assimilation. There
Yeah,
shouldn't be any
yeah,
like chink in the chain. Just go in.
exactly.
Just send them in. Just send them in.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
When it's
And
literally
that
hurting.
is and that's held by the public, who remember their own school days, of course, and who therefore many times project their own experience onto children that they don't know. It's very strongly held, I think, within the educational establishment. They see themselves as inevitable, like Thanos, in the
Mhm.
Avengers. They see themselves as just being an inevitable part of every child's life, and the idea that any child could refuse them is alien to them. And I'd say that as an ex-teacher, there really was just a genuine sense that we are as teachers, we are the social good. We are sacrificing our lives to teach the young people, and it's difficult and it's stressful and it's exhausting. And yes, it is all of those things. Don't get me wrong. There are reasons why I don't teach
Mhm.
anymore. But I think that because of that kind of attitude of don't I've got to be careful here because I don't want to make enemies, but there's a tinge of martyrdom to it sometimes, I think. And that means that any child that dares to say, hang on, no, I don't want this. This is awful for me. They're viewed tremendously negatively. Like, how dare you? How dare you refuse this? This is the government and the teaching staff and the taxpayer all working in unison to get you educated, to give you the best life. How dare you refuse? And in the process of all of that, the child is lost. The child
And
is ignored.
do you think, is there an argument for that would say, and I know just from talking to incredible teachers in here in Ireland, that many teachers will say that like they're doing their absolute best, which I fully believe they are. I've been very lucky to get to know so many incredible teachers, but they'll also say they haven't been provided with the right supports from, say, from the
Oh,
top down, say from at government level, proper programming.
yeah.
Now things have been changing, I would say positively. They had a great resource that came out recently that I thought was, it was a very neuroaffirmative. It was called, I think it's called Relate. I thought it was very neuroaffirmative, a framework from the NCSE. But I think a lot of what's being said from the teachers that I'm lucky enough to speak to, they would say that they feel like they're under pressure, that they don't have the right resources. And as much as you say there's that hint of martyrdom, do you think is there, I suppose, an argument for the teachers and the incredible SNAs? They don't have the right supports in place to support them to do, to do the best that they can to support students that feel like they're feeling unsafe, I suppose, to be in the school environment.
Yeah, that's the reason why this, in my opinion, this narrative of, we are doing what we need to do for the children, how dare they not take us up on it,
Yeah,
is fed by the fact that the teachers themselves are not, yeah, they're not supported at all at any level. I mean, in the UK, for example, I think it's fair to still say, even in 2025, that new teachers, teachers entering the profession, are given very little instruction or information about autism. The joke goes that they get like an afternoon within the whole year of training, just on autism, and it's just not enough. I mean, when I did my training back in 2008, I don't. I know we spent a day on SEN, one day
one day.
on the whole of SEN.
And to think of the profile of, say, if there was even four autistic students in the class, the profile of each of those individuals, let alone a whole student body.
Indeed, yeah.
Wow.
And I don't even remember autism coming up in that. I think that what that tended to concentrate on was behavior management, because SEN, of
Yeah.
course, is all too often equated with behavior management. It's like, oh, I've got
Challenging behavior.
exactly, oh, I've got an SEN kid in my class. Oh God, what's going to happen? It is a kind of prevailing attitude that tends to exist, and it exists for a reason, because ultimately, when you don't know how to deal with something because you haven't got the information, that thing will scare you, especially in a professional,
Of course.
a professional environment. It's like, remember your first day at work when you were a teenager. You'd never answered the phone before professionally. You'd never stacked a shelf before. You'd never used a
Mhm.
till before. You're terrified of them, aren't you? Like
You're
when
nearly
a
afraid to
customer.
touch it. Yeah, I can
Yeah,
remember
yeah.
it.
Like my first job was in a pet shop, like just a little family-owned pet shop. I mean, very quaint and very idyllic. But I was petrified every time a customer came through the door, because I did not know what to do with them. I didn't know how to be a till person. I didn't know how to greet them. I didn't have that information, so I was scared. And in my fear, of course, I probably didn't do a very good job. And I think we see that a little bit reflected in education. Teachers quite rightly don't know what to do with autistic kids. They're not given that information,
No.
even though tragically and cruelly the information is out there. They don't have it. It's not given to them. They're not supported to learn it. They're not given any time to learn it. They're not given any opportunity to go on training courses. They're not given any budget to buy books like my books or Luke Bearden's books or anyone's books. They're not helped at all. So when an autistic student, or let's face it, more than one autistic
Mm-hmm.
student comes into their class, there is, I think, and I look back on my own teaching career here because I felt this, a sense of, oh God, I don't know what to do with these students. I genuinely don't. Like if they kick off, if they do something, I'm not going to know what to do. And that breeds a tremendous amount of stress and fear and anxiety for the teacher. I mean, it's a reason why in the book that I'm writing, it's primarily from the point of view of students, to the point where I've actually got a couple of fictional narrative threads going through of two children navigating their day at school.
Amazing.
But I've also got a chapter entirely from the teacher's point of view. Teachers who feel ill-equipped. They're being sent to do a job they do not know how to do. And nobody is willing to help them. So yeah, I think that is a massive, massive part of the problem. Autistic children can't be supported by people that basically, quite frankly, don't know what autism is. If you
And then
don't
don't
know
how to know what's the correct approach then, I suppose,
exactly,
in any instance.
yeah, if you don't know what alexithymia is, if you don't know what interoceptive differences are, if you don't know what monotropism is, probably the biggest and most important of all,
Mm-hmm.
then you can't teach an autistic kid. It's honestly, I mean, I know that's quite controversial, but I think it's as simple as that.
It's almost like a foundational knowledge base, but
Yeah,
but it's not
yeah,
even seen as the importance that should be placed on every single one of those elements. And they're just three of all the other
yeah,
things that
yeah.
to actively and really proactively support somebody. I suppose that maybe lends itself well then to the next question. And I suppose it's from your perspective, what are the most, say, common but often invisible environmental or relational stressors in schools that can trigger this kind of profound distress that, say, students that feel they can't attend school safely and therefore then avoid and again, I say this as an autistic person that dropped out of school. So I'm not sure what the equivalent is in the UK, but it would have been fourth year. You do your first big state exam at kind of 16, or sorry, maybe 15, 16, and then at 17, we'll say 16, 17 would be fourth year and fifth year. And so they'd be just before your final big exam. So I dropped out of school for 2 years, and only with the
Mhm.
persuasion of my very kind dad to persuade me to go back. I did eventually go back, but I had to repeat fifth year, and then did it like my final, it's called the Leaving Cert, before I went off to college or university. But I could not attend. And for me, I just remember it was literally, if you're thinking of all the structure that comes into an exam, you're probably like the GCSE, all of the structure and all of that leads to that. Then it like disappeared for that fourth year, and then I just dropped out. I think I started fourth year in September and I was gone by the end of the month, because fourth year in Ireland, or maybe it's different now, back in those days, very unstructured. It's about growing into whoever you are and getting to try lots of different things. But
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
really like that. I liked the structure. So, in your kind of own view, then, I suppose, as the educator, but also as the autistic person that's been through the school system, is there any kind of stressors that you think stand out to you that would be kind of, if schools are in this setting right now or find students that, they cannot attend for their own reflective practice? Are there elements that you think that would be an obvious one to consider, like in regards to, say, relational or environmental supports that, say, are or are not in place?
Yeah, I mean, the one that always comes up, and I think the one that actually schools are probably the most adept at working with is the sensory side of things. I mean, it is really important and it is crucial. You can't learn if you're overwhelmed by your environment, and for that reason, being hot on what the individual autistic student needs in terms of sensory, clothing, heat, temperature, light, sound, all those kind of things is really important. But I think because that's quite tangible and quite straightforward, I think a lot of schools are starting to
You
understand
see
that
a lot of
now.
great kind of on social and people developing like sensory rooms and sensory safe
Yes,
spaces.
yeah, it's very common over here in the UK. The schools show them off quite proudly, which I think is a great thing. I do, but but it's a sticking plaster over a much bigger problem because it's my opinion, and it's been my opinion now for many, many years, that the real work has to be in the more abstract area of attitudes, judgments, how the teachers and crucially the other students as well, how they actually treat autistic people and how they treat autisticness. Like the nature of being autistic.
The
You can
literal
have
culture.
Yeah, I mean, just as a basic example, you can have all the calm spaces you like, but just to give you one example, if a student wishing to go into those calm spaces is frowned upon for doing so, then what's the
They're not going
point?
to go in. They
Yeah,
want a high mask
and
to
that
the
would
hilt.
be
Yeah.
that would be an attitude issue from whatever teacher, senior team member, or whoever it is that's doing the frowning. They've made a judgment. They've decided for whatever reason that an autistic child needing to decompress is wrong or unnecessary.
They're not being
And
resilient enough.
exactly, yeah. And that to me is far more harmful than a lack of a calm space, ironically. Like I would rather, personally, and this is just me personally, other people will disagree with me on this, but I would rather be in a situation without a calm room where I could escape to, where at least everybody was understanding of my needs, but also just understanding it. Like somebody's, like if when I was a kid on a school trip, for example, when you can't offer a calm space because you're all on a bus, you're on a coach in Devon or
That's my
South
idea of
Wales or
hell being
somewhere,
on a bus, but yeah.
yeah, you know, like you can't offer calm space, but a teacher could go up to an autistic kid and say, "Hey, look, I know that this is a nightmare for you, but just to let you know, we are currently about an hour and a half away from our destination, but we are going to stop for a toilet break at the services in 45 minutes. So if you want to, at that point, just, have a walk around and get some fresh air and a bit of time to yourself, then you can." Like, to me, that is more powerful than somebody just waving a calm room at me, and saying,
Or
"Well, just
even a
go
fidget
there."
box.
Yeah,
Here's
or
some
like, yeah,
fidgets.
passing me a fidget spinner, because it shows actual understanding. That is a person, a non-autistic teacher saying to an autistic student, "I get you. I don't fully get you, and I can't because, double empathy problem. I don't fully understand, but I am really trying, and I'm trying well. And this is what I'm going to say. I'm just going to be empathetic. I'm going to be compassionate. I'm going to be patient with you, and I'm going to be kind." And in my personal opinion, that is more valuable. But it's also the thing that we see much less of. Because what you tend to see is that you will get pockets of that. There'll be individual teachers, individual Senkos, maybe even individual head teachers who have got that nailed. Like the head teacher at my daughter's school, pretty much got that nailed, that kind of compassion and understanding. But if it's just little pockets here and there, I mean, it's great for anyone lucky enough. It becomes like the postcode lottery. Like if you're lucky enough to have that in your school, then great. But what about all the kids that haven't?
Mm.
Like then what? It needs to be much more normalized. It needs to be a thing that is commonplace rather than, a kind of lucky bonus. Because to autistic kids, that kind of thing isn't a bonus. It's a basic necessity.
It's
And
survival.
yet it's not there most of the time.
So really comes back to that education piece again. And it's not just knowing the theory, but like having, I suppose, the cultural humility to know that it may not be, as you say, double empathy, might not be your
Yes.
lived experience. So this is tricky. But I can see, if you think about cultural discourse, it is your experience. And although I don't
Yes.
fully get it, I can see because I've done my learning, I've done my training, I can see that, okay, we have the sensory calm space there, but actually what you really need is just for someone to see you as a person that needs this break right now, whether
Yeah.
it's, I just actually have an absolute phobia of buses, so you won't catch me on a bus, but if you did, I'd be like, thank you, I'm getting off of the bus at the 45-minute mark, but no, I totally get it. I suppose you've kind of covered a few of the questions there, but I suppose one of the things, and I even said the word there myself, not even thinking, um, what about then for families that are being told? So say if I'm the student way back when, and now this didn't happen, but say if it did, and the school that I went to, they would have said to my dad, just help her to be resilient. Just tell her she has to go in. Just tell her to get it. Just to get. I can remember my poor mother standing over my bed and being like, "Just get out of the bed. You have to go in." And I remember saying, "You can stand there and shout for the rest of the day. I'm not getting out of this bed." And I literally never, I got out of bed and went to work, but I would not go back into school for literally 2 years. But say if I'm the parent now of a child and I have like four autistic children, but say now again we've been very lucky with the schools as well. But say if it was a different school and they were saying, look, my gorgeous Jack, oh, just tell Jack, he just put the uniform on him and push him in the door, and he just have to learn just to get on with it. If that's a family listening, or even the school say that reflectively say, gosh, we've actually done that. Have you any advice there for individuals?
I mean, most schools have done that.
Yeah.
They have. I mean, the school I worked at did that with several students, over the years, a real kind of, again, it comes back to that issue of this just blithe assumption that schools are just inherently doing good, and therefore whatever they are offering you should accept, and B, you have to do it anyway, like it's law and all the rest of it. They're the things that fuel this. Because what the thing is, if you take a step back, and I'm thinking here of a very specific case, I'm not going to name any names because it wouldn't be fair, but I'm thinking of a specific student who I remember being forced, literally kicking and screaming, into the school every morning. If you take a step back from that and forget for a moment you're in a school and that there's a power dynamic here of teacher and teacher and pupil, you'd be horrified. Everyone involved would be horrified. The adult wouldn't even want to do it. Do you know what I mean? Like
it's like torture.
Exactly, it is. It is. Same with restraint. In medical facilities.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Which is its own huge problem.
Yeah.
There is basically this whole thing of, well, we have to do this because we are the ones in the right. We are doing the right thing. They are refusing our rightness, and therefore we must do this to them. This narrative is what drives people to do things that they ordinarily would not do. Acts of cruelty and unpleasantness that they would normally balk from and blanch from. I don't want to do that. But instead, it just happens all over the country, all over the world. It really does. It happens globally. There are autistic kids who are distressed in a way that, if you saw them in a film crying their eyes out and really, really upset, your heart would bleed for them. Your heart would go out to them. And they're treated like this. And that word resilience is used as a weapon. It's used
totally
as
weaponized.
Yeah, you are, again, what a surprise, you are inferior, you are deficient. In this case, you are deficient in resilience. You do not have the grit to cope with this. Because what they're doing is they're comparing autistic kids to non-autistic kids. Now,
Sorry, Pete, I think I hear a child. I'm sorry.
oh, that's okay.
Max.
I can.
Yeah, I knew it. Sorry, he's here. Do you want to say hi to Pete?
Hi, Pete.
Hello.
Hi, Pete. Yeah, you have to go back to bed now.
Hello.
I'm sorry now
Yes.
for breaking your train of thought.
No, that's fine. I'll get it back. I always do. Yeah. So the term resilience has been weaponized. It's been, it's been used to identify yet another source of deficiency, within autistic people. We are deficient in communication. We're deficient in empathy. We're deficient in emotions. All these
Conversation.
false, all these false deficiencies. And one of them is, we're deficient in resilience. And the thing that gets me is that it's so painfully ironic because, I've said it so many times. I don't know anyone more resilient than autistic people that I know.
Absolutely.
Like the resilience that you need to wake up every morning and just crack on, carry on in a world that is, relatively hostile to your needs.
Primarily nearly all of the time as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is incredible. If you're listening to this and you're not autistic, I'll just give you an example of how this might go. So imagine that you've got a job and you go into work and the thermostat's broken and it's freezing. And yet for some reason they won't let you wear a coat. So you end up just really cold the whole day. And for some reason, there's really loud music playing on the speakers that weren't there before, and nobody will turn it off for you. And you complain, but nobody seems to care. In fact, people seem to be suggesting that they can't hear it. So what's wrong with you? How long would you last in that weird dream-like nightmarish space? Like, I don't think many. If you really sit there as a non-autistic person and truly imagine that weird scenario, I think you'd pretty quickly be like, oh my God, that sounds awful. I'd hate that. Like, wow, that is like a nightmare. But I'm not over exaggerating. That is what life is like as an autistic person. The temperature rarely meets our basic needs. It's either way too hot or way too cold because we're calibrated slightly differently. There's weird noises and smells that we can experience, but no one else seems to. And if we ask for them to be sorted out, we're treated like we're bizarre, or lying. We're often treated like we're lying.
Or looking for, what is it? Looking for attention. I've heard before.
Yeah, attention seeking or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like, come on, that is what life is like for us. And yet we still turn up. We're still going. Or most of us, unfortunately, of course, some of us do drop out, both the school and big, in a bigger way.
Yeah.
because you do reach a limit where you just can't do it anymore. And for then anyone to come up to us and say you need to be more resilient, I
You
mean,
just need to give him that loving push to get into school. You're like,
it's like, no, that is not what this is about. This is not about a kid's resilience. This is about basic needs not being met. Needs that, if they were taken seriously, would be recognized as, oh my God, we really need to do something about this. These needs are not being met in such a way that, wow, we are really negligent here.
failing. Yeah.
But that isn't the conversation. Nobody ever talks about schools being negligent about autistic
Even
people.
for my sorry, I have so many. I feel like I have like a 400 children. I don't have four, but my middle son Jack, he appears to, if you didn't know him very well, you'd say, gosh, he's like really verbal, like really so intelligent, all the things. But then I would say, yeah, he's a great talker, loves all the things, but he's actually masking that most of what you're saying he doesn't understand. And there's been a few times last year, like the school year just gone, that I've actually literally given him like 3 or 4 days off together off school, and he has an actual fantastic school, but life in general gets too much for him, and he's had,
Yeah.
like, I would call them mental health days. I would
Yes,
rather him take a
absolutely.
few extra days off during the year than reach 16, 17, 18 and crash out and burn out because I couldn't see that the need was there. So for
Yeah.
me, I would consider that the same as if he'd had, say, an appendix and he was now recovering at home. He needs this because it's literally, as you know, and I know from the research, there's such high levels of, like, and I'm not suggesting if your child is finding it difficult to attend school, it leads to suicidality, but we do know that within the community, there's, extremely high levels of mental health needs, but also on the more tragic end of that. So I suppose talking about then kind of parents and navigating, is there anything from your point of view, if you were a parent today, or if I was a parent today and I'm trying to say navigate with school, that it's not an issue of resilience, it's an issue of my child has needs? Is there any, if there's a parent listening, is there any advice that you could give if they have a child? Say two things. If they have a child that cannot attend school because of feeling unsafe, so there's on the one hand, how can I talk with school, and then on the other hand, if school are going to be proactive and do the things that I think they need to do, how can I support my child then to feel safe to go back? Or is there any kind of, and I'm not suggesting one strategy, one size does not fit all, but as an overarching theme, what do you think might be helpful?
One thing is that you can't expect things to improve quickly.
Yeah.
I think that's a really big thing. I think parents want things to resolve quickly because why wouldn't you? You're
Mm.
desperate for things to be better. So there is a tendency to, to really hope that things will get better fast. And the schools want things to get better quickly
Of
because
course.
they're
It's
ultimately,
collaboration. Yeah.
yeah, and then they need it to speed up because they've only got limited energy and limited hours for the staff and all that kind of thing. But the reality is that actually getting a student, I think, back into education after the damage has already been done is a slow, long process, because you're having to repair an awful lot of damage and wrongs that have occurred. We have to remember the impact of trauma in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
It really isn't too much to say that an autistic young person will end up traumatized by these kinds of experiences.
They will.
Nearly every autistic adult I know suffers some form of CPTSD, which often dates back to their school days. It's often, strengthened and spiced up even more by their work life and by relationship issues and all
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. But often it's rooted in school. Um, and that can't be fixed overnight. That's something where you're going to need a good long plan in place. It could take a whole year, could take longer. I don't know. I mean, I'm not, who knows? It will be
Yeah. Every person's
unique to the
different.
individual. But to think that, this can be fixed in a 2 week window or even a term window is wildly optimistic and really not doing the child as a good service at all. It's setting them up to fail. The pressure there will be too much and it will
And the
just not
pressure on
work.
the parent as well to think, oh, I can
Yeah,
just give them a
absolutely.
few days
Because
off and send them in
yeah,
again. Like it's,
because it'll be their fault, of course. Sadly, they will be the people that are singled out for being to blame. When actually, we're in this awful situation where you can see your child is starting to um collapse a bit. They're starting to fall apart. So you think, well, God, I don't want burnout to hit. I've had burnout, and burnout's blooming horrible. So I'm
yeah,
going
it's
to give them a
horrendous.
few days off. And before you know it, you've got the school on the phone. Where are they? They can't just take time off for nothing, because burnout isn't a recognized reason to. And also, it's really worth bet. This is more of an issue with Western medicine than anything, but it's worth bearing in mind that preventative measures when it comes to healthcare are not treated with the same importance as restorative measures. You know, like
100%.
we like to talk about prevention's better than the cure, but try telling healthcare that, because they don't want to know. It's all about the cure. You know, like there is examples in the UK generally of a real powerful, well, it's trying to be powerful, effort to improve airflow in schools. After
Oh,
COVID,
yeah.
you know, a better realization, for example, of how germs spread and how airborne illnesses can, you know, wreak havoc if you haven't got windows open, if your carbon dioxide levels are high and there's no air circulation. Really basic science, very well supported by the research, and obviously really important if there was ever another pandemic, and absolute flat out refusal to engage with it in healthcare and
Madness.
education, because it's prevention, it's not cure. Wearing masks, prevention. No one's interested. Let's just talk about cures instead. And the same with burnout. It's almost like schools would rather somehow deal with a burned out autistic kid who's depressed and, you know, in a real mess, than they would just give them a couple of days off every now and then when they need it to prevent the burnout. And I think that this could be a human failing. I think as a species, we really do struggle with forethought, you know, and kind of preemptive action. We tend to be very reactionary. You know, it's very clear to me now, for example, that when it comes to climate change, we're gonna do what we always do and try and deal with the effects. The time comes where, you know, the opportunity for prevention is long past, and you've missed that window. And all you can do now is try to fix the damage. And you know, fixing damage is one thing if you're fixing a house. You know, you can fix a house up and it'll be great again, maybe even better than before. Fantastic. You know, human brains don't work like that. Human bodies
No.
don't work like that. You know, the body. What is it? The body keeps the score. You
Yeah,
know,
that book I have actually on the shelf over
yeah.
there. Yeah, The Body Keeps the Score.
Scars, both external and internal, mental scarring, traumas, trauma being the biggest one, of course. These are things that accumulate, and you know, you really need to know what you're doing to get rid of them or to help them. You know, most people don't even manage to do that. Most people that carry trauma, I think it's safe to say, carry it for their whole life. They never,
It's
ever
forever.
deal with it. Yeah. So the idea of focusing on cure rather than prevention it's just incredibly dangerous. And yet that is our general just way of doing things. And I'm talking here really about health generally, not just about autistic people. You know,
Yeah,
mental
it's across
health
the board. Yeah.
generally, physical health generally, but autistic people, as is said, we're the canary in the coal mine. You know, we are the ones that will fall first because we're so much more sensitive, and you know, maybe
We've
given
also
our
nearly had that
circumstances.
lifelong traumas
Yeah, so we're a
unintentionally
bit more fragile.
gathered.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
exactly,
We've been living
exactly.
and continue to live, as you know, in a world that hasn't been set up for us.
In the long, I do want to address the long term because I think it's
Yeah,
important. In the long term, we do need to get to the point where, because at the moment, what happens is autistic children need support. They need adaptations, accommodations, all those kind of words that I'm not a very big fan of, in order to be able to survive at school. But they often have to start from the very beginning. Like they have to start, their explanation of what they need has to start at the very basics, which is too much for anyone to have to
yeah.
do. So there's a real weight on the student and the parent as well to basically explain all of autism to the staff every single time it comes up. And it's, you know, anyone that's ever had to have multiple doctor's appointments knows how exhausting that is to do. You know, to have to keep going over and
You also
over
feel a little
again.
bit unheard every time because you're like,
You
I've
do,
already,
you do.
yeah, you're like, I've done
And
this before.
that's no way for it to go. What in an ideal world, what we would want is for autistic children and their parents to only have to explain their specific type of need, you know, within the general need. So, for example, you would want the school staff to just know about sensory sensitivity. They just know about it. They know it's a thing. They know that a good number of their students will have distinct needs for their sensory environment. So all the student has to do is actually say what their specific needs are, rather than have to explain the whole thing, you know, like the whole, well, I'm autistic and that means that I have sensory sensitivity issues, and you need to believe that because if you don't, then I'm going to struggle. You know, we don't want to have to keep going back to first base all the time. We want to be able to move on a little bit and focus on our specific needs. So in the long term, that is what we want to be trying to aim for. I just want to make, that's really important. But in terms of short-term things and, things that you can take away right now, the first thing that has to come if you're going to include student voice is there has to be belief. And this is, I'm talking here more to teachers and school practitioners than parents and students. You have to believe what they say, because if you don't, then the whole thing's pointless. And the reason I say this is because there's actually a very good chance that you won't believe what they say. And that I can accept. I can understand why that is. I have empathy. I can see why a non-autistic person would struggle with an autistic person's rationale, their arguments, their reasons, their excuses. I can understand that, because how we perceive the world is significantly different. And therefore, when an autistic student does say, look, I did my homework, but it wasn't good enough, so I threw it away. And then I couldn't do it again because I was kind of paralyzed and I couldn't do anything, actually. I just ended up just falling asleep, and then I woke up, and like a non-autistic teacher might hear that and think, that's ridiculous. Like, that's not a thing that people do. But as any autistic person listening to this would probably know, that is
I've literally done that
absolutely
myself when I was
something
in
we
school.
do.
Yeah, I did that
Yeah.
myself.
That's just one example of the kind of thing. But I'm happy to accept that disbelief happens. That's part of the double empathy problem. We don't understand each other. So what you have to do is step outside of yourself a little bit and think, okay, I'm going to struggle with this because this is outside my own experience, but I've got to believe them. Their life's on the line here. They're a kid and they're struggling, they're distressed. So whatever they say to me, I'm going to have to, really try to kind of really get to understand and truly try to empathize with. That for me is really important. And it's entirely on the shoulders of the teachers and the staff. They have to be more open-minded about what human experience actually can be. It's not just how you experience things. Everyone has their own stuff going on, and it can be really wildly different to yours. Another good example of that is ADHD forgetfulness. I mean, in my lived experience as an ADHD person, I know full well that no one ever believes how forgetful I am. They never do. I know they don't. I know that sounds kind of like paranoid, but I know they don't.
Oh no, I believe you, because I'm ADHD as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'll know exactly
Even
what
as you
I'm talking
say
about.
it, I was like, I forgot to do something with a form from
Yeah,
yesterday, and I'm like,
I,
just
I
thought of it now.
often make the point that my ADHD forgetfulness verges on the comical. It's so ridiculous how easily I will forget something. But like I say, I know that most of the people in my life, even if they're neurodivergent themselves, can struggle to believe just how forgetful I am. And that's something that really has to change in society. That we are too comfortable assuming that everyone is basically the same as me, or everyone's basically the same as each
Or that
other.
anyone has a unique experience at all that isn't just like our own.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But in terms of more tangible things that you can take away from this, because I know that people do like tangible stuff, things
Oh,
that
I
are
know.
like very
Yeah, same
practical.
as myself.
First of all, if you're going to listen to autistic student voices, if you're going to hear from the actual student themselves, then you've got to sit down. You've got to find somebody who will get the information out of them. Autistic people are often very, very sensitive to the people around them in terms of who they're willing to actually talk to, because we are hyper vigilant, I think, based on experience, in criticism and in that disbelief that I talked about. So we'll often just clam up completely around some people because we know it's not worth saying anything. Like I remember,
You have literally the trauma of it, of not being
exactly,
believed.
yeah. And I think everyone can relate to this, can't they? I'm sure that everyone listening to this, autistic or not, would know that there are some people that when they say, how are you will be tempted to be honest with, because you trust them and you know them well and you know that they might actually care. You got to find somebody like, my daughter, for example, has a person at school who she trusts implicitly and will talk to very happily. And that's great, because, that's the conduit then. That's the pipeline of information.
That's the dynamic you need to create safety, isn't it?
So find who that person is. And it could be somebody really unexpected, but do think outside the box. It could be anybody. It won't necessarily be their form tutor or their English teacher, or
It could
their
even be a peer in an older class, even. You
it
just don't
could.
know.
It could be, like a year 11. They're in year 7. They've got a year 11 kid that for some reason they feel happy talking to. So be imaginative with that. Be creative with that. Find ways to get that, to get that information from the young person. And when you have that information, take it really seriously. And I would recommend that if you do get information from an autistic young person, that you involve if you can. And obviously, there are issues here around, again, child protection, but I think it is worth getting perspective from other autistic people, especially autistic adults, if there are any staff members, for example, to kind of help translate what the student might have said. Because the other thing that happens is autistic kids aren't born innately understanding their own autism. Do you know what I mean? Like none of us are.
Yeah, I was only
You
thinking about
have
that today
to,
in terms of like my own understanding of my capacity or sometimes incapacity to communicate. That self-insight.
yeah,
Sometimes
it's
we need
hard.
somebody else to say, "Well, did you
Yeah,
ever think of
yeah.
X, Y, and Z?" Yeah,
I mean, after my diagnosis, it took probably, I mean, what was that? 2017. It's 2025 now. To be honest, writing my 2
that's
books was
almost
probably
10
the
years.
best.
Wow.
I know, yeah. I think I really only had a decent handle on, for example, my own sensory sensitivity. Just that, probably 5, 6 years in after
Wow.
my diagnosis. Certainly, immediately after diagnosis, I had no clue.
Did you
Not
feel it was a little
really.
bit like a car crash after your diagnosis? It's like
Yeah,
everything
yeah. I
just
mean,
hit me at once.
it's chaos, absolute chaos. I have no idea what to do with that information. It wasn't explained to me sufficiently that I could, for example, when I was diagnosed, nobody once mentioned alexithymia or
Interception.
RSD, two things which are
Yeah.
incredibly important for me because I experience both in big ways, and that has a big impact on my life. And neither was explained to me. I had to figure that out for myself. And I'm lucky. I'm in a position where I can do that. I get kind of paid, but to read up on this and to write about it and to understand it and to apply it to myself. What kids don't get that, like your average kid isn't spending their evenings, agonizing over this and really self-reflecting about autism. They're playing video games and reading books and trying to have fun and trying to decompress and relax.
And parents are trying to navigate and
Mm,
advocate for them on all fronts, on all
yeah,
systems. Like, so they don't have
exactly.
even the time either. And yeah,
No,
and if they're like
no,
myself, they'd feel guilty on that as well. So it's
yeah.
incredibly difficult.
Absolutely. So, one role that I thought I could see schools taking up in future, if they're willing to, and I believe they're able to, but if they're willing to, is to be educational about this and actually help autistic students who are newly diagnosed or who are pursuing a diagnosis to understand what this bloody means for them.
But wouldn't it be
Like,
great if it was part of the mainstream curriculum, like a whole
oh,
module that
it
was
it
mandatory
should
on
be.
neurodiversity?
It should be. It really should be.
Maybe it
In
will be one day, but
It
I
will
hope it
be.
will be.
I firmly believe that. In the same way, but actually, there are reasons to be skeptical though, because other education on minority issues, so for example, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, etc., it's not like they're taught particularly well. But
Yeah.
I mean, I remember, for example, I learned a lot of what I know about race and racism and issues in America and issues in the UK through literature. I
I
really
was just
did.
about
I
to
think
say,
many
yeah.
people do. That's one reason why we teach literature, of course, and history, to get this information out there and to make it real. So I learned a lot from To Kill a Mockingbird. That was a really big
Do you know what
moment
I
for me.
we read it when I was in school, and this is what really like opened my eyes to the world around me was Roll. Did you ever read that book, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry? It's
Yes,
Mildred
yeah,
G. Taylor.
absolutely. Yes,
I remember
exactly.
reading that
Yeah,
about Cassie Logan, and that was it. I was like
yeah,
entrenched in
yeah.
all kinds of I suppose literature based on that particular topic. It was
So
like
yeah,
eye
we,
opening.
we learn about minority experiences through that. I mean, I remember I used to teach a module on feminist literature at A level. And that was again another example of this. Of getting that minority experience taught through stories, through books, which is great. And as an English teacher, I think that is very powerful. I would also like it to be taught more formally too, but I think it is good. But there isn't an equivalent for neurodivergence. The close,
Maybe as
the
a
closest you
teacher,
get is
maybe that's something that you might do in the future for us, Pete, because you'd have that insight. Like imagine having a mainstream curriculum, but even a mainstream text, say, appear on the GCSE or the A levels
oh, absolutely. Well,
that you've
at the
to.
moment, I mean, what we get at the moment, the closest we get to it at the moment is Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time. that is on the curriculum of plenty of British schools.
It's a bit
But
outdated now, though.
it's not great. I mean, I don't
No.
even think he's referred to as being autistic at any point in the book, and it's a very,
I
very
don't think
limited.
but I don't think the author is. No, could be completely
No,
wrong, but I don't even believe the author. Yeah, I
I don't
remember
think he is, unless
read
he's
that
been like
like
diagnosed. It's
donkeys years
possible.
ago, and then my dad actually had seen it in a shop and bought it for me, and I was like, "Thanks, Dad." And I was like, "I'll just
Yeah,
put that up on the
yeah,
shelf and not ever show it to my kids in the nicest
yeah.
possible way." I just kept it because he bought it as a gift, but I was like, "I won't inform this man right now. Don't buy that for anybody else." But yeah, no, I totally understand what you're saying. I'm just watching the time and I don't want to take too much more of your time. But I've maybe one final question, and this would be for parents like myself that are listening, because you've given so much incredible insight and knowledge to, say, educators and also for autistic people listening, kind of how to support themselves. But for parents that are listening that are feeling shamed or feeling guilty, or they're worried, like they're obviously going to be worried because any parent would be right to worry about their children and their education. But if they're feeling shame or guilt, or is there any words of advice that you could impart just to support them to know that if they are a parent like myself that was just like took Jack out of school there for a few days, mental health days needs them, is there any advice you could give to, say, parents listen to the podcast today?
I think that the thing that is really important is that when you have autistic kids, and when you're autistic yourself as a parent, perhaps too, you really do have to parent your own way. You have to parent in what actually ends up being a very unique way, and you will get pushback. Concerned grandparents will be like, well, ooh, is this the right thing to do? And neighbors and at the school gates, you do get a lot of kickback, but you are that little person's only true advocate in the world. Be
I
be
have
be
to take care of them.
confident and be firm and strong in your own parenting. You know what's best for your kid. Don't, when grandma says, "Oh, no, 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 he's got to wear his Christmas jumper. It's Christmas. He's got to wear his Christmas jumper." Say no. And who cares if it ruins Christmas? Seriously, who cares? Because who really matters here? It's the kid. It's your child. There is no one more important than them. No offense to grandma and granddad, but you're not as important as my child. My dad is not as important as my daughter. Sorry, Dad, but you're not. And it's
Hard
just the way
truths
it
being
is.
revealed here on the podcast.
Yeah, my poor dad's like, oh, that's harsh. But I'm confident that he would understand, because that's just how it works. Your child is everything.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it helps to hear me say, "Do it your way," then do it your way. That's great, because it's the only way to do it. There's got to be a sense of flexibility around how we parent, and
And
tradition
no
isn't all
shame.
about, yeah, without shame,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Because
And
we've
if you're
been
ever
shamed
wondering,
enough.
if you're ever thinking about, how, oh, but we've been raising kids for centuries and it's always worked, and why has it really worked? Like one of the most famous lines in English literature is, "They F you up, your mum and dad." Philip Larkin, absolutely famous line of poetry that people quote quite happily, because it's
Unintentional,
true.
but they do. Yeah,
They do, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. They do not wish to, but they do. And that is everything. What if it's actually entirely possible for parents not to mess you up? And what I mean by that is parents knowing their child and bringing them up the way they need to bring them up for them, because they're
and not
autistic or
and not to
ADHD or
societal or external family standards.
exactly,
Bring up your child
exactly.
as you know the best. And I even feel like when I was listening to you there, I was thinking of the phrase, like, let the love and the adoration that you have for your child fuel you to know that
Yes.
you know in
Yeah.
your heart how to raise your child. Try to, I always think, I can't think of the name, you may know, the horses that have like the little things that cover their peripherals, whatever that's called, the little kind of
Blinkers. Yes.
blinkers. Yeah, put on the blinkers and be like, this is my child. I know what my
Yeah.
child needs,
Yeah.
and I'm going to do everything I can to support them in that. Now, I'm going to finish the podcast there, but for anyone in particular, anyone listening anywhere in the world, but in particular people in Ireland, Pete is actually coming to the west of Ireland, which I'm very excited about. Myself, I was saying this to Pete at the top of the call, myself and my friend Gemma are going to do a road trip to Sligo to see you when you come west. But you're actually going to, for anyone listening that knows Carrick-on-Shannon, he's also going to be coming to Carrick-on-Shannon and to Sligo and to Dublin.
So it's late September. So the the Sligo public talk, which is open to everybody. You just
Brilliant.
have to get a ticket and come along. It's at the Radisson Hotel because, why not? Because they actually
Amazing.
really kindly offered to do it, which is great of them. That's on the 29th of September. It's a Monday night, 7 o'clock, and I'll be doing a talk and a Q&A and a book signing and all that kind of stuff.
I'll be there with my book
you
being
do.
like, Pete, sign my book. You'd be like, get security to get me out of there.
Oh no, it'll be great. And then on the Wednesday, that's when I'm in Carrick doing 2 talks for the county council there.
Amazing.
The first talk is, I think, at 9 o'clock, and that is for local business owners, local employers,
Brilliant.
people that maybe have a few employees, but not like a giant company. Just come along, and I'll be talking about making employment easier and better for autistic people. And then the talk that I'm doing later on, I think at like 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock kind of time, is for self-employed creatives. So I'll be going through how I've managed to survive, as a self-employed creative, as a writer. So I'll be giving some hints and tips
As a
about that.
genuinely brilliant person, how you survived, just because you're incredible. That's how.
Well, exhausted and highly disorganized, but yeah, surviving just about. And then on Thursday, I'll be in Dublin. I'm doing a talk for a big for VHI, a big company, and Dublin University as well. So that's a busy
Oh,
day on
wow.
Thursday. But
God,
then
you
I
definitely
should
need some
have time
downtime after.
afterwards. I'm not flying until Friday, so I should have time for a pint on Thursday night.
Get
So
yourself a
yeah.
Guinness.
Oh,
Well, listen.
honestly, when I had Guinness in Ireland for the first time, it blew my mind. Like, wow. I've had
You
Guinness
have
a
to come
lot
back
in
for
my
more.
life, but yes, yeah, it was
Well,
something else.
well, listen, thank you so, so much for being on the podcast. I know you're
Thank you.
incredibly busy, a gentleman, but genuinely thanks. And as I said to you at the top of the call, bit of a fangirl, really. I even have your book. So thank you so much. So listen, that's the end of the podcast, guys. I suppose you'll see or hear from us again next week. So thank you very much. And huge thanks to Pete for coming on the call tonight. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you.